My name is Gayle, and welcome tonight to my Be Bodacious channel, where Be Bodacious stands for not letting life get in the way of living. That includes dealing with disabilities and taking a service dog to a hotel. There's a couple of things that people don't really think about. Question number one that we need to talk about is prepping for the trip. I am not just talking about dog food, water bowls, a colored sheet to put on the bed. Tuber Chat is in here. Hi, Tuber Chat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's good to see you. Y'all, if you're not familiar with Tuber Chat, you need to go check them out. Really a great channel, super positive. Can't say enough about them. Can't say enough. They're great at networking. They'll show channels. You'll get some ideas for what to do with your channel to make it better. Whether you're talking about service dogs or anything else, they're just a great channel, great people. Thank you for coming in. Tuber Chat is sharing on Reddit. Thank you, Tubers. Thank you very much for that. I do try to follow your Reddit account, and whenever I'm on Reddit anyway, and go through and check out the videos there. It's a neat place. If your hotel is going to do valet service, you want to make sure that you put all you can in one bag that's going to be easy to carry, just because you're not going to have ready access to the car. So pack that bag before you leave home so you can just grab it out of the car. And that's the bag where you want to make sure you have your food and water bowl, your food, toys. If your dog sleeps with you, you want a really bright colored sheet, or at least not white or off-white, to go on the bed, because sometimes when the hotel service comes in and cleans up your room, they just grab all the sheets off the bed and go and wash them real quick, and they're not necessarily paying attention because they're in a hurry. So don't bring a white or off-white sheet. Make it something colored. So that's the first thing you want to do is think about, where you're going to be. Now, if your hotel has parking and you're going to park in the parking lot, you can go out to your car and get it. So you still want to pack the basics, but you don't have to really cram your bag full. You want to double check where the relief areas might be for your dog, because chances are they're not going to have a designated area. So when you pull in, or when you go to look at Google Maps, pay attention to where those grassy spots are. Are they going to be close to your room? Can you get to them easily? Things like that. Are they on a slope? Those are the things that you want to know. So it may behoove you to call the hotel before you go and ask them some of those questions. If you have a hotel, say, that doesn't have a grassy area, let's say you're maybe in the desert Southwest, for example, and what you have is hard dirt and gravel. You need to prepare your dog to be able to handle that situation for toileting, because obviously it's very different to do it there than it is on nice, soft, lush grass. You're going to have to give them plenty of opportunities to learn how to go on gravel and dirt, asphalt if absolutely necessary. It sounds like a small thing, but it's really super important. And dogs can have a hard time adjusting to that. So you want to practice ahead of time. If you're going to go to a hotel that has elevators and your dog is not used to being on an elevator, then you need to find a place where you can practice getting on and off the elevator. So you may need to go to a doctor's office or a mall, any place that's got an elevator, so you can practice going on and off. And again, lots of praise, lots of treats. I've got a video that shows my service dog going on the elevator. So what we do, and it seems to work really, really well, is we go into the elevator. I'll give him an about and bring him between me and the wall. There's usually a handrail there that you can grab onto, but that keeps the dog between you and the wall so that when people come off and on, they're not stepping on his paws. They're not getting his tail caught in between their suitcases or their luggage. And generally, you're helping to protect your dog. So I like to have him right there. I give him the command wall so he knows he's going to stand there through the elevator ride. Now, something I suggest is to have a friend or a couple of friends go with you if at all possible. Because when you're practicing with your service dog on how to get on and off an elevator, generally in real life, you're not going to be on the elevator by yourself. So you're going to have to walk around people. And you're going to need to get your dog ready to be able to navigate that little opening between the door and the floor that you're going to step onto and getting them around people. So I know you're probably used to getting them around people in supermarkets and so forth on how to go around them. But it's a little different when you're in a cramped space. And if you can teach your dog to wall and put your dog in between you and the wall, then chances are you're going to be able to get pretty much straight off that elevator. The challenge comes in when you go to get on the elevator and there's a bunch of people already on it, or even 2 and 3 people already on it, and you're having to navigate around them. So take the time to get your dog used to the elevator. Okay, it pays off. And if you have a couple of friends that can go with you to help kind of get in the way while you go off and on the elevator, even better, because he'll be used to going around them. You don't want to just do this on one day. Do it for several days. And I know it's kind of a pain, but it pays off in the long run. So do everything you can, treats, praise, toys. If you can play with a toy, after you get off and stuff, all of that's going to help. So you want to make sure you do that. Hey, Valerie Reese, it's all about the adventure is in the house. So hi, Valerie, and welcome. And I want to remind you all, don't forget to give me a like, please, on the live stream, because that really helps me out. So you want to get them used to that. The other thing that you need to know before you go to the hotel is, what about dealing with steps? Steps are hard for dogs, okay? They're hard for people sometimes, but they're harder for dogs because the dog has to go up each step, often 2 paws at a time. And if they're not used to walking up and down a flight of steps, that's something you're going to have to work on. And you're going to need to find a flight or 2 of steps and keep practicing that. And you're going to want to practice that with your hands holding something. Because in a hotel, when you go to take your dog up to the room, you're not just going up by yourself, right? With nothing in your hands, you're going to have his bag of gear and you're going to have your suitcase. So that goes back to packing. Make sure it's something that you can manage. Okay. It came as a rude awakening to me when I was with a girlfriend and my service dog, and we got to the hotel and found out that they didn't have an elevator and we were going to have to go up steps. I did not know. I thought all hotels just about had elevators these days, but they don't all do it. The steps that we had to go up were, fortunately, interior steps right by the office, and they had no skid on the steps, which helped us be able to get up, and of course carpet on the bottom and carpet on the top. Well, that's very different than what some hotels have. some hotels still have the outdoor steps. That's really important to practice with your service dog if you're going to stay in a place that's got the steps. And even if they say, hey, we have outdoor steps, but you can stay inside on the ground floor, you still need to do some practicing with your service dog, because the person who's staying in that ground floor room, if it's a handicapped room, they might stay over. So you might get bumped. Or something can happen in the room and it can suddenly go out of service. I am a former hotel worker and I can tell you these things happen. So prepare your dog for that. Prepare them on wet steps, prepare them on dry steps, because if the hotel steps are outside the hotel, you're going to be subject to weather, okay? So give the hotel a call before you go so you can really prepare, okay? Let's see. I've got a list of some questions that I've been asked, so let me go through here. Also, when you call ahead, I know you shouldn't have to do this, but ask whoever answers the phone about service dogs. Say, hey, just to let you know, I'm coming in with a service dog. It is a task-trained service dog. Just to make sure, just to clear up anything that might happen when you get into the hotel. And they will tell you, oh, it's fine, but you have to do X, Y, and Z. Or, oh, we don't allow dogs, and you may have to have that communication there. Now, hotels are notorious for tossing you curveballs. I stayed in one this past spring at Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And I got there, I thought, oh, I'm not going to have any problem. This is a choice hotel property. When I got there, I was asked to sign a contract. The contract stated some things that it shouldn't have and some things that it could. So I was told to sign and say that I would not leave my service dog in the room unattended. Well, when I talked to the Department of Justice, they said that part of it was fine, because under the ADA law, your service dog has to be under your control at all times, either on a leash, harness, or by voice commands. And if your service dog is alone in the room, guess what? He's not under your control, right? So that part was okay. But it also said that I was agreeing that if my service dog alerted that the hotel had the empowerment to call 911 and get me some help. And I said, look, if my service dog alerts, it's going to be for blood sugar usually, or because I've just fallen. You don't need to call 911 because of that. And they're like, oh, if your service dog barks, then we have to call. And no, that's not true. You don't have to call if a dog barks. Now, if the dog is barking continually and it's a service dog, I told them, go check. But you don't have to automatically call 911. And I told them, not all dogs bark to alert. And that blew their minds. So, I had to agree to that. I had to agree to not putting a do not disturb tag on my door while I was staying at the hotel. And I was like, why? And they said, well, we want access to your room at all times so that if your dog barks, we can call 911 and they can go in. They can't do that. They can either make all guests sign an agreement not to put the do not disturb tag out, or they cannot make or they cannot single you out. So either everybody does it or nobody does it. And so we had to have a little conversation there. And I would not have expected that. but calling ahead might have told me that. So that's something that I now recommend doing, even though we really should not have to. So just call ahead, make sure that there's not going to be any problems when you check in. And that brings me to the next thing, the desk clerk. So, okay, here's the thing. When you have a service dog and you are anywhere with that service dog, you can be asked 2 questions. Is this a service dog required because of a disability, and what work or task has the dog been trained to do? They cannot ask you to demonstrate, show papers, show an ID card, or anything like that. You don't have to have a special leash. You don't have to have them in a vest or any kind of gear. I suggest that, but you don't have to. So when you go to check into the hotel, the service, the desk clerk, who you've got to plan on, they get people in all the time that are trying to pass off pets and emotional support animals as service dogs. So you may have a problem with the desk clerk. And if they start asking you more than that, or ask you what your disability is, then you may have to say, look, stop. You can't do this. And so, as part of my general prep for traveling and going to any hotel or Airbnb and campgrounds or anywhere, I make sure I take a copy of the service dog law. They have an FAQ on the website. So I print that out, and I make sure to print out anything that I feel like is going to be relevant to the trip. So the part about hotels, the part about restaurants, you're going to want both of those for a hotel. So you get there and hopefully everything goes fine and you don't need any of that. But let's say you get there and the desk clerk tries to say, oh, there's only certain rooms that you can go into with a dog. Well, that's not true. As a service dog handler, you can go in any room. And I have had that happen where the desk clerk argued with me and said, no, we only have 2 rooms in the hotel set aside, and that's what you have to use. And that's not true. The other thing is, you want to make sure that the first thing you do is just reach over and get the business card for the general manager. Stick that in your pocket or your purse or your backpack, because you want to have that. Hopefully you won't need it, but just in case. So when you go in, if the desk clerk starts saying, there's only certain rooms, or we have to charge you extra because we don't allow dogs, or there's a pet fee, then if you can't get that successfully navigated with the desk clerk, you're going to need to call the general manager. And you're going to have a conversation saying, look, the ADA law right here says you can't do this. You are within your rights to leave. If it is after check-in and check-out, they're going to try to bill you for that room anyway. So just know that. And that's something that you can argue with the general manager if you decide not to stay. And you can argue with your credit card if you wind up leaving. Obviously, those things are not easy. They're difficult. They can be frustrating. But, the alternative is having a difficult stay with your service dog. So, just know that the desk clerk may make that determination at that moment, but you have other alternatives. And so the alternatives are business card to talk to the general manager. Now, if you have problems and you can't go to the general manager and get a successful outcome, you need to talk to them at corporate. When you talk to them at corporate, you're going to want that business card because you're going to want to make sure that you have the general manager's name correct. And if there is any phone number with an extension on it, you're going to want to make sure that the company has that, because sometimes what they have is the general hotel number and they don't have that little extension. So you're going to make sure that you have that. Hopefully you won't have any problems, but just in case you do, those are some ways to deal with the desk clerk. Okay. And the other thing is the breakfast area. Now, the breakfast area is like any other restaurant. The dog can go with you into the breakfast area. The dog can lead you through essentially the buffet line at the breakfast area, but some people may complain. Now, part of that may go back to your desk clerk. They may say, well, you can only sit in a certain area or certain seats with your service dog. That's not true. That's where having a copy of the ADA law, or sometimes pulling out the business card and saying, look, I've got your general manager's name. I'm just going to have to talk with them when they come in. In the meantime, I'm going to sit right here. You know, I have had that happen to me where I have had to argue with hotel staff on where I was going to sit in a breakfast area, even after I had a fine, smooth check-in. But they can't make you sit in a certain spot, just like they can't make you sit in a certain spot at a restaurant. They can't make you put the dog under the table if your dog won't fit under the table. As long as you're not blocking regular traffic, if your dog, just like in a restaurant, if your dog needs to lay down next to you because there's no space under the table, then as long as you're not blocking traffic, your dog can do that. But if you start blocking foot traffic and you start becoming a hazard to other people, that's where there's a problem. So when you pick out your seat in the breakfast area, try again to go to a place where your dog can wall and get up next to the wall in between, and he's in between you and the wall, just for safety, so he doesn't get stepped on. Okay. Corners are really good. If you can go to a corner, if your dog's got good manners and you can sit next to a trash can, sometimes that's a good option. Someplace safe. Okay. The other thing is, at the breakfast area, if you have somebody with you, it can be helpful if the breakfast area is busy for your other person to go and get your breakfast items. You can also ask the clerk, not the clerk, you can also ask the breakfast person who is over the breakfast area if they can do it, and make sure you tip. Okay. And I'm a tipping person when it comes to the hotels because I've been there, I've seen it done, and I know how hard it is for the breakfast staff to keep that up. And you got to figure, this is a buffet, just as if you were going to go to the Golden Corral or someplace like that. So give them a tip. That's just a thing for me. All right. Denials. Service dog denials are hard to deal with. It's compounded by the fact that you've been traveling all day, you've been driving, you're exhausted, and you really just want a nice, clean, comfortable room, and you get there and you get a denial. There's again a couple of different things you can do. One is, pull out the service dog log, get the business card, Tell them you want them to call the general manager, call corporate. There is often a toll-free number that you can call. And if you're a rewards member at whatever brand, try calling that rewards line because you may get better service that way. But ultimately, you're going to have to decide how much of a hassle you're willing to put up with. You can have the police come out to get that denial documented in case you want to go through the Department of Justice later. You're going to need that police report. Also, telling the desk clerk, gee, I'm sorry you're making this decision and you're denying us. So now what I have to do is I have to call the police and get it documented and let them talk to you and explain to you about the service dog law. So generally, when you get to that point, they realize that you're serious and they'll kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, okay, fine, come on in. If not, then the police can explain to them the law, and it may come to the point where you say, hey, you're potentially interfering with a service dog's ability to work. And that can be against the law. So there's several things that come into play. Obviously, one thing that you can do is ask the desk clerk to call the general manager at home. And you can tell the desk clerk, hey, you might want to mention to your general manager that I'm about to call the police to get this documented and go from there. The other thing is, if you arrive before the cancellation cutoff, then you have the option of leaving pretty easily. Okay. And that varies between hotels. And that's where you're in your prep for the trip, you're going to need to know that magic line. Okay. So that goes back to your trip prep. But that's how you can handle the service dog being denied by the desk clerk. Okay. Toileting, we talked about a little bit. So, and the only other thing, other than making sure that your dog can effectively take care of business on the surface that you find yourself in, the other thing is, of course, your treats and your doggy bags. Make sure you have those. Okay. And the reason I say treats is because I have those so that when my service dog goes appropriately, he gets a little treat for his reward. So if he's not used to being on the gravel and he goes, he gets a treat. So he can associate going on the gravel or going on dirt with being a good boy. Okay. All right. So on the hotels, you need to sit back and think, does your dog sleep in the bed with you, or is your dog better off in a crate? Now, I've already said that if your dog sleeps in bed with you, you need to have a colored sheet, okay? Not white, not off-white, but colored. If your dog is in a crate, think about what else you need in that crate, because it's not just a box. It's a box and a blanket or a towel and a bed, something for the dog to be on that's soft and comfortable. So make sure you have that. Make sure that it's clean. If it's got a cover on it, wash it before you get there. Just make sure that it's clean and it looks nice. Housekeeping is probably going to come into your room at some point to take out the trash and make the bed, and you just don't want it to be all junky looking, because that sets up in their minds that there's going to be a problem with the room when you leave. You don't want that. So think about that. And so that can make a difference in the type of crate that you bring. So generally, there's two different types of crates, three different. Well, two different types of crates plus the travel kennel. And a travel kennel is a hard plastic box with air cuts in it so the dog can get air and breathe. It's designed with a handle on it so you can carry it. And even large dogs in the evening can get in the kennel, and you just go ahead and close the grate door and flip the latch. But there's two other types. One is your standard wire dog crate that you set it up. It just sets up in a few minutes, lots of flaps, and then boom, you're there. Generally, those types of crates have two entrances, where the big plastic one only has one entrance. The more entrances you have, the better off you are, as long as they don't interfere with the stability of the crate. So one on the end and one on the side is perfect, because you don't know what kind of space you're going to have in the hotel room. And having one on the side and one on the end, it just opens up more options. Options are good. So, and the other type of crate, and I can put some of these down. They're going to be in my list on my Amazon store. I'll link that in a comment down below after the live stream. But the other thing is a padded crate or a cloth. It's got a cloth cover on it. And that is generally a plastic or metal frame. And it's got the cloth and the mesh sides. It's easier to put up and down. It only takes generally a minute to open that thing up and set it up. And then you can put the blanket or the bedding or the towel, whatever you use, on in there. Often those also have the front and the side entrances, which are very helpful. And they both fold up about the same size, or at least mine are about the same size. Very helpful, very handy. So think about what type of crate that you're going to need if you need a crate. Otherwise, you may not need it. You may just need a colored sheet. Okay. Nosy people. Nosy people happen. Okay. Rude people happen. People are just weird. Again, general people can ask two questions. Is this a service dog required because of disability, and what work or task has it been trained to do? Those are the two questions. If you have a service dog, memorize those questions, because if they try to get you to show ID or whatever, you need to go back to that. Okay. You don't have to show ID. That the Department of Justice does not recognize any kind of service dog ID or registration or certification. Inc. doesn't recognize any of those. So you don't have to show them. Okay. You don't have to show them. People will be rude. They'll be nosy. They will ask, well, what's wrong with you? Inc. You don't have to answer that. When people ask, what does your dog do? You can be very general. You can say mobility and medical alert, or you can just say medical alert. You don't have to be in specifics, okay? Now, if you want to, that's fine. Sometimes I will say medical alert. He helps me with epilepsy alerts if I'm about to have a seizure, blood sugar alerts for high and low, asthma alerts. And by that time, usually their eyes glazed over and they're about half asleep. So you can go into detail, but if you're not comfortable with it, and a lot of people aren't, just keep it general. Medical alert, mobility, PTSD assistance if you want to go that route, but just kind of keep it broad. And so sometimes they'll push. And this is annoying for everybody. Now, I walk with a leg brace, and technically, people are not supposed to ask you when it's obvious what your dog does. They're not supposed to ask you, hey, what does your dog do? If I go in, I've got my leg brace on, he's in his mobility harness, I've got my hand on his harness, it's obvious that he's balancing or bracing, they still ask. They still ask. And the next thing is, a lot of times, well, what happened? Well, you're awfully young. Why can't you walk well? You can tell them if you want to or not as you want to. They're not supposed to ask. And hey, if you need to walk off and leave them, if you feel like that's being rude, that's okay. I will give you permission to be rude. Because here's the thing, you're not being rude at all. You are setting your boundary and you are protecting yourself. That is completely different from being rude. So if you don't want to take the time to answer all the questions that somebody might throw at you, that's okay. You don't have to. Those 2 questions are all that you have to respond to. And if they keep asking, say, I'm sorry, I don't feel like going through my personal medical information, or I don't feel comfortable having this conversation. Just some way to shut it down. And those are the 2 primary ways that I do it. And if you're in a situation where you have a service dog and you've been asked, then please leave a comment on how you shut those conversations down, because it can be super helpful for the next person. Okay. And the other thing is the ID. And I kind of talked about that a minute ago. If you go through a program, most programs, the one I went through, and I've talked to a lot of other people who have program dogs, they will give you an ID with usually a picture of yourself and a picture of your dog together on the ID, or just the dog. You don't have to show that, okay? It's just because you have it doesn't mean you have to show it. But if something comes up and your service dog goes missing, let's say you're out somewhere, the service dog sees a squirrel, rabbit, or whatever, and he slips his collar and he's gone, then that tag can help you identify your dog. But one thing I would suggest about dog identification, make sure your service dog is microchipped. And make sure before you leave that microchip is functioning. Go to your vet and say, hey, can you just take a second and scan my dog? I just need to make sure the chip is functioning, that it's not gotten corrupted, and everything is A-okay. Make sure that your info is up to date. Oh, people these days, we change jobs, we change cell phone numbers, we sometimes change email addresses, and you really need to know that all of that is current. Don't rely on memory. Physically double check that, because you need that information just in case your dog goes missing, because a vet's office, humane society, nobody can call you if your microchip isn't up to date. But the really big thing is to have a microchip. They are not expensive. They only take a minute. Every dog should be microchipped, in my opinion. But if you have a service dog, if you're walking around and you've got a $25,000 service dog, it only makes sense to spend that extra $10 and have them chipped. It's just safer. Let me see. Yeah, Valerie Reese is even saying that all dogs should be microchipped in case they get away from their owners. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it can also help to do a dye job on your dog, maybe the tips of his ears or tips of his paws. I like to dye just a little bit of Pipsy's tail, just to help make him more identifiable. and take current photos. Now, most of us, if you were like me, I have a million photos on my phone of my service dog. Make sure you take a couple of really clear, sharp photos from different angles of your service dog, just in case they go missing. You know, things happen. Even the most spectacularly trained service dog, at the end of the day, it's still a dog. So it's going to think like a dog, it's going to respond like a dog, and you want to make sure you get your dog back. Okay? Very important. Having chip, check the chip, make sure everything's up to date. And a word of advice or caution when you're looking at prepping your dog to go for a hotel stay, make sure if you're at a higher elevation that your dog is adjusting to that elevation change. People have problems adjusting to elevation changes. Guess what? So do dogs. So if you're at sea level and you're going to the mile-high city or higher, you may want to drive. It may make more sense to be easier on your dog to drive. If you are flying and you go from sea level to up high, take extra time once you get there. Don't go out and immediately play with your dog really heavy, get them exhausted. Take a slow walk. Give them time to adjust to the elevation change and the atmosphere change. Same thing if you're going from up high to sea level, okay? And if you are on a road trip, pay close attention to your route. I'm over here in East Tennessee at the edge of Virginia. When I go to New Mexico, I am going from 3,000 feet down to a few hundred feet above sea level, back up, back down, and then up to about 7,000 to 8,000 feet. So the dog has to adjust to all of those different levels. And doing that successfully may mean that if you're on a road trip, you stop more often. You get out and you let your dog walk. It's only going to help you and the dog to be out of the car, but it's that much more important when you're on a road trip. Now, if you're on a road trip and your elevation doesn't change, then it's not as much of a big deal. But it's easy to check on the elevations before you leave home and when you're on a trip. It only takes a minute to do that. And I strongly suggest it because you don't want to be out somewhere and your dog gets sick, especially with something preventable, like being able to stop more often and walk to get used to the elevation change. Now, after your dog has had a couple of days to adjust, then yeah, take your dog to the dog park or walk him around, throw that tennis ball, all kinds of things there, but make sure he is acclimated before you do that. It's super important. And always, always, always take a first aid kit with you for pets. Now, there's all different kinds of first aid kits out there, right? Just like for people, some are more advanced than others. So pick out your first aid kit. Try to get one of the better ones that's on Amazon. Then take your first aid kit into the vet because you're going to have them scan it anyway to make sure that microchip is working. So take that first aid kit into the vet and say, look, what do I need to add? Generally, you're going to need to add some hydrogen peroxide or something to make your dog throw up, just in case he eats something that he's not supposed to. If you have a lab, they're going to eat something that they're not supposed to at some point. So ask your doctor, vet, about something to make them throw up, something to handle diarrhea, just in case you have that. how to handle constipation if you have that problem, and just make sure you have everything in the kit that you need because, like I said, just like humans, they're different. You're also going to want vet wrap, a good pair of tweezers, things like that, because dogs can get splinters just like people can. And when they're walking, they can get a little piece of glass in their paw or a little pebble stuck in there, and you need to be able to handle these things. You're also going to want some neosporin or maybe some kind of steroid cream. Your vet is the best person to advise you on that. Okay. So go ask. If you want to leave me a question, drop it down in the comments. I'm always happy to help. Oh, and just to go on to the background on this, I've been a service dog handler since 2006, and I have worked in the travel industry since before that in various capacities, working front desk, hotel housekeeping, reservations agent, and travel writing, and so on. So that's what I am basing all of this on. This is going to be a super exciting, scary, nervous time for me when we do the live stream next week because I get my new service dog a week from tomorrow. I won't be able to share any pictures or tell you what kind until after graduation. The service dog program kind of frowns on that, but I get it a week from tomorrow. So wish me luck. Wish me luck. And you all go out. Again, have a great week. And I'll see you Sunday at 7:30. Thank you all for coming out. Take care. Bye.